perfect. And I salute Mike for going back home to the people who've been good to him. You got what I like about Mike is he's got a good memory. He was kind of a down and out guy after the injuries, and he went to California. Generally, that's a tough thing to do from the East Coast, and he's become a top rider there in the Grade 1 races. And so, Mike, I'm with you on that. I am.
Well, tell me if I'm wrong, but the commitment he's honoring
is for
John
Moss,
Sheriffs and the Mosses.
And the Moss family. Of course, you're not wrong. No, but why wouldn't you? I mean, Calvin honored Rachel Alexandra.
You're going to honor that commitment.
That's all. I mean, that's life. It's okay.
So I thought he did a fine job.
I did too.
You know, listen, you all know how much I adore Rachel Alexandra. And I'm not making excuses. Why do I have to make excuses?
She won the race.
But I do think one of the great things in sports, and interestingly, we saw it last night with Johan Santana when the Mets played the Boston Red Sox. He didn't have his A game. But when it came down to critical pitches, the Boston Red Sox were 0 for 10 against Santana with runners in scoring position. I love it in sports when Tiger Woods doesn't have his A game and he can grind it out and put together the best score he possibly can. These are the very, very special athletes. I don't think she liked that racetrack. I don't think Calvin is making an excuse, but I think she probably brought her B game and still beat the boys.
He doesn't have to make any excuses. I take issue with it simply because it's a whole different ballgame. How do we know that her circumstances were not being with the tension of facing colts and having a different situation? She simply lays over everybody else. If the Kentucky Oaks was run on the Preakness Day track and she won by 10 or 15 or 20 lengths over 5 maiden fillies, he wouldn't even bring up whether or not she didn't handle the track. It just wouldn't look that way. This was a different thing for her. I hope she comes out okay. I'm not going to change my worry position on that. And to be honest with you, I'm at the point now where I'll be very surprised if we see her in the third leg of the Triple Crown.
Oh, I don't think we're going to see her in the Belmont either, but, you know, I'm not sure she has a whole lot she has to prove coming back in another 3 weeks.
I hope she comes back and wins 3 or 4 races. That's what I really hope for her.
Let's take a look at the complete order of finish for the Preakness Stakes, and we've got some quotes from, well, first, the winning trainer, Steve Asmussen, and I'm quoting, "What an amazing 10 days this has been. I can't tell you what a fan of the filly I've been. They, meaning the filly's former connections, Hal Wiggins, did a great job with her. Mr. Jackson has been rewarded in his faith with her. I am very blessed. Mind That Bird finishing second, beaten 1 length. His trainer, Chip Woolley, again, I'm quoting, I'm thrilled to death with the race my little horse ran. Everything was going according to Hoyle until the turn when he was fanned a little wide. I thought we had a chance at the 8th pole, but you have to give that filly credit. She's a great one." Mike Smith, the rider of Mind That Bird, said he's a tough little dude. He worked his way through there and kept on trying. If we could have gone another 16th of a mile, I think we would have tackled her. On the backstretch, I tried to duck back in, but there was a lot of traffic. I had to do what I had to do. Honestly, he's one of the best I've been on. He's very balanced. But Rachel Alexandra beat the greatest colts in the country today. You have to take your hat off to her. I thought she'd come back to me, but she kept on going, end quote. And Musket Man, a $15,000 purchase. Every time they load him in the gate, he runs his eyeballs out. Now maybe, just maybe, because he's a Yanaguska, he just can't get that last 16th. Well, but you know what? He's a terrific racer.
He sure helped his sire out already.
Derek Ryan, his trainer, was quoted as saying, "I saw Rachel Alexandra breezing at Churchill before the Oaks, and I knew she was a superstar. My horse ran well, but we got beat by a great one. She's a filly for the ages." And Abar Koa, the jockey of Musket Man, said, "No complaints at all. I had a good trip, except at one point at the 5/16 pole, and that's what we showed you, I had to stop riding for 3 jumps. I think that cost me second place." Flying Private, a very surprising 4th. I'll tell you what, I don't often say a horse who ran 5th ran a good race, but considering everything that happened to Big Drama, I thought he ran well. And considering the fact he was coming off a single sprint race, I think this is a horse with a bright future. I thought that was a very good fifth. Papa Clem, absolutely no excuse in running sixth. Terrain, no factor. Love Gov, no factor. You know, the story of General Quarters is a wonderful story, but let's face it, he isn't good enough. I mean, that's basically it. Frisian Fire ran 10th. Going down the backstretch, he was sitting a perfect trip. In fact, I'm saying to myself, I hope he doesn't split me out of the exacta, because I didn't like him at all, yet he was sitting a garden trip. What has happened to Frisian Fire? 7 weeks before the Kentucky Derby, partner, he was on top of the world. He had come off that magnificent performance in the Louisiana Derby, and then subsequently off the 7-week layoff, a poor effort in the Derby on a bad racetrack, but a dreadful effort in the Preakness.
What are you going to say?
Dreadful.
What are you going to say? He's just fallen from the top.
Pioneer of the Nile struggled with that racetrack from the very start. You could see Garrett Gomez scrubbing on him very early on.
Yep.
He got beat 26 lengths. That is a stunner. Tone It Down had no realistic shot. And Don Lucarelli, talk about stunned. He's got to be stunned by the performance of Take the Points. I mean, he was awful.
Terrible.
Just awful. So the complete order of finish for the 134th Preakness. Now, let's look ahead 2 weeks very quickly at the possible prospective starters for the Belmont Stakes. And first and foremost, the question mark on Rachel Alexandra. Neither of us think she's going to run. Mind That Bird. Who will ride Mind That Bird is the big question. Charitable Man, the Peter Pan winner, he worked a sharp half mile this morning in 47 4/5 over the main track at Belmont, where he is undefeated. Chocolate Candy, 5th in the Kentucky Derby, will be ridden by Garrett Gomez in the Belmont Stakes. The Lucas duo of Flying Private and Love Gov, the Nick Zito trio of Miners Escape, Brave Victory, and possibly Nowhere to Hide. Summer Bird, who was 6th in the Derby, he will be ridden in the Belmont Stakes by Joe Talamo. There's an interesting selection. And he will race with blinkers on. Summer Bird worked 7/8 of a mile this morning in 26 2 and galloped out the mile in 1:41. Mr. Hot Stuff was 15th in the Derby. He's the brother to Colonel John. And Dunkirk, 11th in the Derby as our selection, will be ridden in the Belmont by Johnny Velasquez. And that's because Johnny V rode Rags to Riches to a Belmont victory for these very connections. And Dunkirk will work Monday morning at Belmont. So there's a look at the prospective starters for the Belmont and a couple of notes. First post on Belmont Stakes Day, 11:35. And the Belmont post time will be somewhere between 6:25 and 6:30. So there you have it. Now, we are up to our first break on this morning's May 23rd edition of the program. Thank you so very much for having joined us. When Michael and I return, we will head out to Southern California. Now, Rachel is unquestionably the finest 3-year-old filly in the land. But the gentleman who's going to join us in a moment has a sensational filly. She's the finest older mare in the land. She is Zenyatta, and he is John Sheriffs, and John will join us after the break. As we go to this break, on the Preakness undercard, the Dixie, on the proper surface. With the scratch of Proudinski, it left number 3 parading as the 2-1 favorite. So we'll take a look at the Dixie going to the break, and Michael and I will be back with John Sheriffs right after these messages.
In a controlled tempo, Loro out there 3/4 of a length. Senior now going to try to quicken up that pace. Parading getting a little closer from 3rd, and Mamba is 4th. Strike a Deal 5th, and Kiss the Kid racing 6th. Baltimore Bob is 7th. Musketeers on the outside, then Just As Well. Back to Wesley, 2nd to last, and Nightscape trailing the field. Into the turn. Loro still holding on to the lead by a head from Senior. Parading out there to join them. Strike a Deal called on for run from 4th, just 2 lengths in the front, followed by Mamba. Baltimore Bob trying to sneak through down to the inside as they are into the stretch at the 3/16. Loro still fending off Challenger Parading, but Parading now pushing by to put ahead in front with 1 furlong to go. Strike a Deal, and here is Just As Well quickening up out in the center. Just As Well coming on the outside. Just As Well closing the gap on Parading. Parading holding on, and it's Parading and Kent Desormo from Just As Well, and Wesley may have been 3rd from Loro.
I watch it all the time. I love watching the OTB shows with the personalities, and then I watch the when I'm at home, I've got it on watching the races, and it's great now that they've got the replay of it live. You know, like 2 or 3 minutes after post. So, you know, they flip it off in 2 minutes. I'm gonna get to see the live race. So, I always take my program home with me, and if I'm not back at the barn, I'm watching it at home.
Welcome back to Down the Stretch, everyone. Mike Veach to my left, I'm Mark Asano. And the Dixie goes to parading for Shug and Kent by a half length over Just As Well, his first graded stakes victory on the proper surface. Well, last week, one of our guests was Hal Wiggins, who had the finest 3-year-old filly in the land in Rachel Alexandra. This morning's first guest is the man who has the finest older mare in training in America, in Champion Zenyatta, who will make her 2009 debut later this afternoon in the Milady. Joining us live via telephone from Southern California, Mr. John Shirreffs. John, Mark, and Mike welcoming you back to Down the Stretch.
Hi, good morning.
Morning,
Good
John.
morning, John.
John, Zenyatta was entered 3 weeks ago in the Louisville Distaff, but was withdrawn. Why did you decide to scratch her that day?
Well, I decided it had rained and the track was a little wet. I did want to start her on an off-track first race back, and when I went out at 10 o'clock and they floated the track, so I decided to scratch her.
John, any potential problems in getting her, prepared, cranked up for her comeback, then having to go to a plan B?
Not really, no. It was, it's one of those things where she got a little break because the weather was, as you know, Saturday it rained, and I think Sunday and Monday it rained there, so she couldn't train for those 3 days, and so just got a little rest, and then came back here to California and has done very well since then.
So how is she doing coming into her 2009 debut in this afternoon's Milady?
She's doing great. She is just doing super.
John, our audience is about to take a look at her last start. This, a victory in last year's Breeders' Cup Distaff / Ladies Classic. She'll be coming from last on the screen. Tell us, has she changed at all from the last time we saw her?
Not really. She's maybe put on a little bit of weight because she hasn't run yet, and she's been training very well. I think the break helped her a lot. She had not a real long campaign, but a tough campaign. So she's just probably a little bit heavy and pretty sharp right now.
John, she's 5 years of age now. Is she still enthusiastic with her training?
Yes, she is. She one of her workouts, I think the workout before last, she showed that little that real quick burst, where she closed the gap really fast, and that's always an indication that she's doing well.
She is 9 for 9. 8 of those victories have come over synthetic surfaces. But, John, I can make a pretty strong case that the best race of her career was her only start on dirt in the Apple Blossom. Any plans to bring her east later this year for some of the major summer stakes?
It's difficult with the Breeders' Cup being on the West Coast. so not wanting to ship her around too much. I don't know. We'd have to talk with Dottie, the racing manager for the Mosses, and Mr. Moss, and kind of make a decision there.
John, you're in a pretty unique position, training a sensational race mare. So I think our audience would be very interested to hear from you. What did you think of Rachel Alexandra's performance in last week's Preakness?
Well, I'd like to go back to her performance in the Kentucky Derby, because hardly ever as a trainer do I say wow after a race, and I had to say wow after that one. Yeah. And then her performance in the Preakness, I thought just emphasized what a good filly she was, because Calvin said she didn't like the track and she gutted it out. So I thought it was also a very good performance.
John, obviously one of the things that made the Preakness so special was we had a filly beating the boys. The million-dollar question everybody wants to know, particularly me, will Zenyatta face males at some point this year?
We have to sort of take it race by race. If she's in the same position she is, or similar position at the end of the year, then that'll, of course, be a decision that Dottie and the Mosses will make.
John, history, you got an opportunity to really make history here, at least at the end of the year. No filly or mare has ever won the Breeders' Cup Classic. I mean, is Dottie, are the Mosses entertaining any thoughts at this point of making her final start of the year the Classic rather than the Distaff?
It's hard to project out that far, but they've talked about it.
John, will this, I guess this is one of the few questions I hope to get a no as the answer, will this be Zenyatta's last year of racing?
Yes.
It will.
Yeah.
Well, that is unfortunate. Obviously not the answer we wanted to hear, but John, one final question before I send you over to Michael. This is pretty interesting because you're bringing her back in the Milady, and the filly she's got to beat is your other filly, Life is Sweet. Why run them against each other?
We tried to avoid that by going to Kentucky, but it didn't work out. So this is the next logical step. So, at this point, you take them individually. They're owned by different people, and you have to treat them that way.
All right. Well, for a discussion on, probably the major threat to Zenyatta this afternoon, here's Michael.
John, I'm very glad to speak with you again this morning. And before I ask you about your filly, Life is Sweet, I just want to say you are the greatest problem solver that I've seen in a long time. So if you can come up for something to placate my partner, Mark, over Zenyatta's future, please let us know at some point. But anyways, let's go to Life is Sweet. John, this filly has quite a bit of turf in her pedigree underneath, and she raced pretty good in good company last year on it. So when you got her, did you instantly plan on putting her on the main track, or did you have the other thing in the back of your mind as well?
No, we were always, Marty had always wanted to try her on the synthetic surface, so as long as she was working well on it, that was the plan, is to keep her on the main track.
Well, she's coming off a pretty doggone good race and a very, very important race in California, the Grade 1 Santa Margarita. We're going to take a look at this terrific score, and when it comes up on the screen, she'll be number 2 here, last top of the screen. But a couple of related things here, if you will. She was so good that day that the trouble line said she inhaled her rivals. You just don't read that very much in the past performance line. And it came at the end of a monthly succession of graded victories. She's gotten very sharp and very comfortable with you and in her style. My question's not so much about this race, and we're going to see her rallying wide here, but rather the change to Hollywood Park today is the venue. It's a different synthetic. Is that on your mind?
Yes, it is, because as we saw at Oak Tree last year, a lot of the turf horses did well on the pro ride. Mm-hmm. So I'll have to see how she does on the cushion track here. It's an entirely different surface.
John, she's a storm cat, and storm cats are well known for behavioral and temperamental problems. How is she to be around, and how does she take to her training?
She is a storm cat, and she does have her quirks. yesterday we took her down the chute, and usually the pony breaks her off on the other side of the track, but today, because she's going to run today, so yesterday I gave her a little shorter gallop, took her down the chute, jogged her around, and when she left the pony, her left leg went out about 3 feet as she tried to cow kick him leaving. So, I mean,
Wow.
yeah, I said, I've never seen a horse do that so viciously. You know, she just really went after him. But that's her. She's when she's sharp, she's quick.
Well, gosh. Finally, John, for me, and switching gears just a beat up, but you know, racing fans in the East here, we read about the troubles in California with the reduced dates and whatnot. You know, I'd like to ask you to comment upon, you know, if you will, the state of the game out there and, you know, your hopes for the future. Nobody enjoys reading stories like this.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I know it. You know, it's funny. I was walking in the track this morning, and I met somebody and telling me about some person that was a lady in the racing office that passed away. And I was just thinking, you know, racing should be all about the celebration. And I think we need to, you know, enjoy the horses and watch them perform and just start celebrating it a little more instead of finding everything that's wrong with it.
I'm with you there, John.
You know, in California, obviously California is a funny state. Everybody knows that California is just a little bit different. They're a little bit out there. So I think California people react a little faster and maybe aren't as patient. But, you know, California is great racing.
No doubt about it. Well, I was very happy to speak with you again today, John, and here's Mark for some final thoughts.
Well, John, I loved your response about celebrating the horse. Why not consider celebrating part of your summer here in Saratoga by bringing Zenyatta for a couple of the stakes?